Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to Hidden Scriptures Word Study Commentary number 173. Was the changing of the food laws prophesied? Like many of you, I was raised in your typical run-of-the-mill Christian environment where we ate pork every day because we believed what our pastors were teaching us. But the reality was that what they were teaching us not only did not line up with Scripture, it was not even logical. There was a total disconnect from the culture of the people at the time of our Messiah. Our antinomian pastors claim that Jesus changed the perfectly working food laws, not understanding or comprehending that had he attempted to do so, he would have been stoned to death as a false prophet right there on the spot, no questions asked. Okay, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 13, and this is Moses addressing a new generation. You shall walk after Yahuwah your Elohim and fear him and keep his commandments. And of course, these commandments include food laws and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast to him. You shall serve him and cling to him, some Bible versions say. Verse 5, but that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death because he has spoken in order to turn you away from Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to entice you from the way in which Yahuwah your Elohim commanded you to walk. So you shall put away the evil from your midst. Okay, but that prophet, our Messiah, was the prophet of prophets. So if he had attempted to change the food laws, as he has been falsely accused by the antinomians of doing, he would have been stoned. Okay, no questions asked. Of course, he was not stoned because he was not a false prophet. He was not changing the food laws. This belief that antinomian Christians have, that Jesus changed the food laws, comes from the doctrines of men and not from Scripture. And the reason we know this is because there is no supporting evidence anywhere in Scripture for this belief. This belief is based on a combination of false teachings and, in my opinion, wishful thinking. Amos 3:7, Adonai Yahuwah does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. I am Yahuwah. I change not. Antinomian Christianity has been teaching the masses for some time now that the food laws were changed by Jesus. But how can that be when it is revealed in the Amos passage above that the creator of heaven and earth, who does not change, and who made and established the food laws, does not do anything, especially something as significant and drastic as suddenly changing the perfectly working food laws without first revealing his plan to do so to his prophets first. Now, that being said, can the antinomian believers show us anywhere in Scripture where the prophets have mentioned anything about the Father's plan to change the perfectly working food laws? In the meantime, while we are waiting for that, let me show you guys what one of the prophets did say about the consumption of the forbidden unclean meat of swine flesh. pork. Yeshayahu, we know him as Isaiah, chapter 65. I have stretched out my hands, says Yahuwah, all day long to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good, according to their own thoughts. A people who provoke me to anger continually to my face, who sacrifice in gardens and burn incense on altars of brick, who sit among the graves and spend the night in the tombs, who eat swine's flesh, pork, and the broth of abominable things is in their vessel. Now, when I was looking at this, I found it interesting. The word abominable is H6292, found in the Strong's Concordance, H6292. And I found this interesting. When I looked at the definition of H6292, I found this: pig ghoul. Pig ghoul. So the broth that was in the vessels of these people who were eating swine's flesh, pork, the broth was pig ghoul. Okay, side note, what is the significance of altars of brick? Because it was forbidden in the Torah to build altars with anything other than whole natural stones. And we find this command in Deuteronomy chapter 27. And this is, of course, Moses talking. And there you shall build an altar to Yahuwah your Elohim, an altar of stone. You shall not use an iron tool on them. You shall build with whole stones the altar of Yahuwah your Elohim, and offer burnt offerings on it to Yahuwah your Elohim. You shall offer peace offerings, and shall eat there and rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim. The fact that Yeshayahu, Isaiah 65 verse 3, tells us that these pork eaters, these swine eaters, built an altar with man-made brick instead of the whole natural stones as instructed in the Torah, reveals to us that the people who did this are clearly antinomian, lawless. They wanted to do things their way, not the Father's way. And this is true today. A very clear connection is made here between antinomianism, practicing lawlessness, and the eating of pork, swine's flesh, which is forbidden by the Father as per Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy 14. This same connection holds true today because Scripture tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. You show me an antinomian Christian, and I will show you someone who has been taught by their pastors and family members who believe, think, and claim that it is now permitted and acceptable by the Father for them to eat shrimp, pork, rabbit, squirrel, catfish, etc., because Jesus, for some reason, changed the perfectly working food laws. Let's continue in learning what the prophet Yeshayahu had to say. And we're in Isaiah chapter 66. For indeed, Yahuwah will come in fire, and his chariots will be like the stormy wind, to render his anger with rage, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For Yahuwah will execute judgment by fire and by his sword on all mankind. And those slain, those killed by Yahuwah will be many. Verse 17, those who vainly attempt to sanctify and cleanse themselves, to go to the gardens to sacrifice to idols, following after one in the center, who eat swine's flesh, detestable things, and mice, will come to an end together, says Yahuwah Elohim. The complete Jewish Bible renders verse 17 this way: those who consecrate and purify themselves in order to enter the gardens, then follow the one who is already there, eating pig meat, swine flesh, reptiles, and mice, will all be destroyed together, says Adonai Yahuwah. So not only has the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, not revealed to us the Father's plans on changing the perfectly working food laws, but in fact, what he showed us is the exact opposite. The prophet had very disparaging things to say about the pork eaters, the swine eaters. Is there anywhere else in Scripture where we can find a prophet revealing to us, or anyone else for that matter, the plans of the Father of him making any changes to the perfectly working food laws? No, not a single word. So, in the absence of such evidence, it is quite apparent and obvious that there has been absolutely no changes concerning the food law, which means that what the Father forbade his people to eat back when the food laws were given is still forbidden today. Nothing has changed in that regard because there is absolutely no evidence in Scripture to support this supposed change. So why do antinomian Christians believe that there was a change in the food laws? Because they have elevated the doctrines of men taught to them by their antinomian pastors and family members over what the Father has stated and established in Scripture. The doctrines of men that they stubbornly cling to allows them to continue eating their shrimp, pork, lobster, clams, oysters, squirrel, rabbit, catfish, etc., even though it is forbidden by the Father for them to do so. In adhering to the doctrines of men instead of the Scriptures, they don't have to give up eating all the things they love, which happens to be forbidden by the Father for them to do so. Folks, there is a reason why the forbidden and off-limit items taste so good. Okay, there's a reason for this. Do they not understand, the antinomian Christians, do they not understand that the kingdom is going to be ruled and governed by the very rules that antinomian Christians refuse to obey now? Do they not understand that the Father himself will be teaching the Mosaic law from Jerusalem? The Father, folks, the Father was the lawgiver, okay? He is going to be the one who is going to be teaching the law, the Torah, from Jerusalem. The same Mosaic law, the same Torah that they have such disdain and contempt for now, the same Mosaic law that contains the unchanged food laws, this same Mosaic law, the Father will be teaching the nation all throughout the 1,000-year reign of our Messiah. Do they not realize this? Do they not understand this? And the answer is, with a high degree of certainty, no, they do not understand this because they are not taught this by their antinomian pastors. Okay, Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 2. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of Yahuwah's house shall be established on top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Folks, this is talking about after the second coming of our Messiah, after the great battle of Armageddon. And when it says, and all the nations shall flow to it, all the Gentile nations that survive the second coming of our Messiah and the great battle of Armageddon, all these Gentile nations shall flow, shall come to Yahuwah's house in Jerusalem. No, is his house, is Yahuwah's house built yet? No. Will Yahuwah's house be the third temple that we hear so much about today? No. Amos chapter 9. In that day, I, Yahuwah, will raise up the tabernacle of David that has fallen and close up its breaches, and I, Yahuwah, will raise up his ruins, and I, Yahuwah, will build it as in the days of old, so that they may possess the remnant of Adam, speaking of mankind, that survived the great battle of Armageddon and the second coming of our Messiah, and of all the nations on whom my name is called, says Yahuwah, who is doing this. Okay, and we have Shaul, the Apostle Paul, repeating this. And to this degree, the words of the prophets, as it is written, after these things, I, Yahuwah, will return, and I, Yahuwah, will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen, and I, Yahuwah, will build it again, the ruins thereof, and I, Yahuwah, will set it up, that the residue of men, the remnant of Adam, that survived the great battle of Armageddon, the residue of mankind, may seek after Yahuwah, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith Yahuwah, who maketh these things known from of old. Okay, continuing, Yeshayahu, chapter 2. Folks, let me just go back here. Yeah, okay. So we started in verse 2, now we're in verse 3. Many people will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the Elohim of Yaakov, Jacob. He, Yahuwah, will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion, out of Zion, shall go forth the Torah, the Mosaic law, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. He, Yahuwah, shall judge between the nations, and he will rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Now, folks, when I was raised in the Pentecostal Christian church, we always heard verse 4, but for some reason we never heard verse 3. And I wonder why. Of course, I know why. Okay, continuing. Verse 5. O house of Jacob, O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of Yahuwah. The light of Yahuwah is his Torah. The light of Yahuwah is his ways. The light of Yahuwah is his paths that he has instructed us to walk in. That is the light of Yahuwah. And of course, the light of Yahuwah is his son, our Messiah. They're all one and the same, folks. And this is repeated and verified by another prophet. Okay, so we had Yeshayahu, and now we go to Micah. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of Yahuwah's house shall be established on top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and peoples shall flow into it. Many nations shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the Elohim of Yaakov, of Jacob. He, Yahuwah, will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion, the Torah, the Mosaic law, shall go forth, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. And he, Yahuwah, shall judge between many peoples, and rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So, in their desperation to hang on to their justification for eating what the Father has forbidden us, his children, to eat, where do these antinomians turn to? To Peter's vision, of course. Where else? Well, folks, the trouble with that is Peter himself did not interpret his vision to mean that the food laws had been changed. In fact, when explaining the vision to other people, which he did on several occasions, he never mentioned one single word about food. Not only that, but when the elders in Jerusalem heard Peter, Kepha, tell them the story of what had happened in Joppa and Caesarea, they too never mentioned one single word about food. Both them, the elders in Jerusalem, and Peter, Kepha, independently from each other, determined and understood that the vision that Peter had was all about the opening up of the good news gospel message of Messiah to the Gentiles. So, with this evidence, how can a rationally thinking individual still believe that Peter's sheep vision was about the changing of the perfectly working food laws? Whoops, I almost forgot. Another passage that antinomians try to use to justify eating pork is found below. Okay, they will go from Peter's sheep vision, they will go to 1 Timothy chapter 4, Timotheus chapter 4. Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of Elohim is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of Elohim and prayer. Now, the only way for people to believe that the above passage is the evidence that allows them to eat shrimp, pork, etc., is due to their desperation to hang on and not have to give up eating the things they love, which are forbidden and off limits. Where in Scripture can it be found that what the Father created and deemed to be unclean and off limits for us can now be received by us as food with thanksgiving? If Jesus did indeed make all foods clean, then where is the evidence from Scripture where the Father had deemed to be unclean and off limits for us is now sanctified? Where is that at? Here is how that passage should be read. For every creature of Elohim is good, and nothing clean and permissible is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified, the things that are clean and permissible, by the word of Elohim and prayer. Folks, for those of us who can think rationally, we understand that praying over meat that the Father has deemed to be unclean and off limits for us cannot be made clean and permissible for us to eat. This is simply a ludicrous idea. Proverbs 28:9. One who turns his or her ear from hearing and obeying Torah, Mosaic law, even his or her prayer is an abomination. Okay, hearing, of course, you guys know that this is H8085 in the Strong Concordance, and the Hebrew word is Shema, and the definition of the Hebrew Shema is hearing and obeying, hearkening to and obeying. Okay, one who turns his or her ear from hearing and obeying Torah, even his or her prayer is an abomination. An antinomian Christian cannot pray for unclean and off limits food to be made clean and permissible. Okay? It is simply ludicrous to think that they can do so, because scripture tells us right here that their prayers are an abomination. But yet, this ludicrous idea, this was what I was surrounded by when I was growing up in the Pentecostal Christian church. I was surrounded by this ludicrous idea, and I was taught to believe it myself when I was young and before I knew better. But it's simply, this idea simply does not line up with Scripture. It doesn't make a bit of sense. Okay, everyone, I think I will leave it here for today. Okay, there is no evidence in Scripture of the food laws being changed, okay, because there is no evidence of Scripture of these plans of the Father to do so being prophesied and shown to us in Scripture. There's zero evidence anywhere in Scripture of the food laws being changed. The only place we find the food laws being changed is in the doctrines of men. Okay, folks, I love you guys, and I very much appreciate you all being here. It really means a lot to me, and we will be with you again in the next Hidden Scriptures Word Study Commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something from it today. And take care, and we will see you in the next Word Study Commentary.